2 miles, 3,500 meters. At that distance, a bullet is in the air for over 8 seconds. The Earth literally rotates beneath it. They called the shot mathematical suicide. They called her a token PR stunt. In 8 seconds, she would violently silence them all. The air inside the Joint Special Operations Command bunker in Erbil was thick with the smell of stale coffee, ozone from the server racks, and the distinct, suffocating stench of impending failure. On the massive digital map dominating the front wall, a blinking red dot sat nestled deep within a jagged topographical nightmare, the Kandil Mountains. The dot represented Dieter Voss, a former rogue intelligence broker who had just acquired the missing primary core of a stolen tactical nuclear weapon. In exactly 48 hours, Voss was scheduled to sell that core to a splinter syndicate with no political goals and an insatiable appetite for chaos. "We can't fly over it. We can't drive through it," General Arthur Clayton said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that commanded absolute silence in the room. He leaned over the briefing table, planting 2 heavy fists on the laminate surface. Russian-made S-400 anti-air batteries are nested across these 3 peaks. They have overlapping radar coverage. A drone will be turned into confetti before it crosses the valley threshold. A halo insertion is a suicide mission. In a ground assault up that single-access road? Clayton shook his head bitterly. It's a fatal funnel. We'd lose a platoon before they even reached the courtyard. CIA Station Chief David Harper, a man who perpetually looked like he hadn't slept in a decade, rubbed his temples. So, we just let Voss walk away with enough fissile material to wipe a major European city off the map? What about a sniper team? Overlook the courtyard, take him out during the handoff. Clayton let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He tapped a laser pointer on a ridgeline across the valley from Voss's compound. This is Peak 82. It is the only line of sight into the courtyard that isn't obstructed by the canyon walls. Do you know the distance from Peak 82 to the target zone, David? I don't know. A mile? Try 2. 3,512 meters to be exact, Clayton said, dropping the pointer onto the table with a clatter. The world record sniper kill is 3,540 meters, set by a Canadian operator in Iraq. But that was flat desert. This is a high-altitude mountain valley. The thermals are violent. The wind shears in 3 different directions simultaneously. The air density changes every 100 feet. It's too far. The math breaks down. Even if we had a shooter capable of that miracle, the bullet goes transonic before it reaches the target, loses stability, and tumbles. Clayton looked around the room, his eyes daring anyone to challenge him. It's impossible. I am not sending 2 ghosts onto a freezing mountain just to miss the shot, alert Voss, and watch him vanish into the tunnels forever. It's not impossible, sir. The voice came from the back of the room. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't aggressive, but it cut through the heavy silence of the bunker like a scalpel. General Clayton narrowed his eyes, peering into the dim lighting. Standing by the door, arms crossed over a faded tan combat shirt, was Chief Petty Officer Abigail Weston. She didn't look like the stereotypical action hero. She was 5'7", lean, and unassuming. Raised on a sprawling, struggling wheat farm in Nebraska, Abby had grown up calculating wind drift and bullet drop on coyotes trying to take her father's livestock. When the Navy finally opened the SEAL teams to women, she didn't just pass BUD-S, she broke the course's marksmanship records. But to the old guard like Clayton, she was still an unproven variable, a diversity win pushed by politicians in Washington. "Excuse me, Chief?" Clayton barked. Abby stepped forward into the harsh fluorescent light. "I said it's not impossible, General. The Canadian shot in Iraq took roughly 10 seconds to reach the target. At this altitude, 8,000 feet above sea level, the air is thin enough to significantly reduce drag on a lathe-turned monolithic solid bullet. A custom 416 Barrett round won't go transonic until 3,600 meters. Clayton's jaw tightened. "Chief Weston, I don't care what you read in a ballistics manual. Do you understand what a cross-valley wind does to a bullet over 2 miles? The wind will push the round 30, maybe 40 feet off target. And the Coriolis effect, the Earth's rotation will shift the bullet exactly 22 inches to the right during its flight time at this specific latitude," Abby interrupted, her voice entirely devoid of arrogance, simply stating facts. "The wind is the real issue. It's a barber pole wind. It blows left to right off the peak, dead center over the valley floor and right to left at the target courtyard due to the thermal updrafts from the canyon. She walked up to the digital map and traced a parabolic arch with her finger. I don't aim at Voss. I aim 46 feet high and 28 feet to the left of his chest. I let the wind carry it out, the updraft catch it, and gravity pull it down. Clayton stared at her, a mixture of disbelief and anger brewing in his chest. You're talking about a shot that has a 1 in a million probability of connecting. If you miss, Voss gets spooked. He takes the core into the bunker, and we lose him. Millions of people could die because you wanted to prove a point, Chief. I don't shoot to prove a point, sir, Abby said quietly, her steady gray eyes locking onto the general's. I shoot because I don't miss. The room was dead silent. CIA Chief Harper looked between the two of them. General, Harper said softly, if we don't try this, we have zero chance. If we let her take the shot, we have at least some chance. Clayton stood in silence for a long, agonizing minute. He looked at the map, then back at the simple, quiet woman standing before him. He saw no ego in her eyes, only cold, hard mathematics. You have 36 hours to get into position, Clayton finally growled. God help us all if your math is wrong, Weston. The insertion was a masterpiece of misery. To avoid the Russian radar nets, Abby and her spotter, Petty Officer First Class Tommy Reynolds, had to halo jump from 30,000 feet, deploying their chutes dangerously close to the jagged peaks of the Candil Range. They landed in knee-deep snow on the dark side of the mountain, instantly engulfed in a freezing, biting wind that threatened to slice through their tactical cold-weather gear. From the drop zone, it was a brutal 14-hour vertical climb. They carried 80-pound rucksacks loaded with survival gear, ammunition, and Abby's primary weapon system, a heavily modified Macmillan TAC 50, re-barreled to fire custom, 416 solid brass projectiles. The rifle alone weighed nearly 30 pounds. By the time they reached the designated hide on Peak 82, Abby's muscles were screaming, and her lungs burned from the thin mountain air, but there was no time to rest. They set up beneath a rock overhang that offered natural camouflage and protection from the worst of the elements. Tommy immediately went to work, draping their thermal-defeating netting over the front of the hide, blending them perfectly into the gray and white jagged rocks. Abby lay prone on the freezing stone, deploying the bipod of the massive Macmillan. She adjusted the cheek rest, feeling the familiar, comforting cold of the metal against her skin. Through her Schmidt and Bender optic, she dialed in the magnification. 2 miles across the terrifying expanse of the deep canyon, the target courtyard came into view. It looked like a postage stamp. Distance to target center, Abby whispered, her breath pluming white in the freezing air. Tommy was beside her, peering through his high-powered spotting scope. He tapped the laser rangefinder, 3,512 meters. Elevation drop is -4 degrees. Stand by for atmospheric data. Tommy pulled out their lifeline, a Kestrel 5700 elite weather meter linked to an Applied Ballistics Garmin watch. The digital computer was designed to calculate the impossible variables of long-range shooting, barometric pressure, temperature, humidity, spin drift, aerodynamic jump, and wind gradients. Temp is 14 degrees Fahrenheit, Tommy muttered. Pressure is 22.1 in Hg. Hold on. Suddenly, a violent gust of wind howled through the canyon, carrying a flurry of ice crystals that battered their hide. The temperature plummeted instantaneously. It was a localized mountain squall, the kind of freak weather event that couldn't be predicted by satellites. Tommy cursed under his breath. Abby. What? She asked, her eye never leaving the scope. The Kestrel just died. Battery froze out. The voltage dropped too fast. Abby's heart skipped a beat. She carefully pulled her eye away from the scope and looked at Tommy. He was desperately trying to warm the small device inside his armpit, but the LCD screen remained stubbornly blank. The extreme cold had killed their digital brain. Garmin? Abby asked. Linking failed when the Kestrel died. We lost our real-time atmospheric feed, Tommy said, his voice tight with panic. In the modern era of sniping, losing your ballistic computer at extreme ranges wasn't just a handicap, it was a mission-ending catastrophe. Abby, we don't have the data. The wind is changing every 5 minutes. We can't make this shot analog. Abby closed her eyes. She pictured her father on the porch of their farmhouse in Nebraska, holding a worn-out notebook filled with handwritten windage charts. Technology is a crutch, Abby, his voice echoed in her memory. The wind talks. You just have to know how to listen to it. She opened her eyes. Pull out the Mildot Master and the paper dope cards, she said calmly. Abby, a paper chart can't calculate a 3-zone wind shear over 2 miles. It doesn't have to. I'm going to do it. Tommy stared at her like she was insane, but his training took over. He pulled a laminated notebook from his chest rig and a mechanical slide rule used for analog distance calculation. For the next 12 hours, they lay in the freezing mud, doing the agonizing math by hand. Abby watched the mirage through her scope, the optical distortion caused by temperature variations in the air. By watching the way the mirage rippled, she could gauge the wind speed and direction at different intervals across the canyon. Wind zone 1, our side, Abby whispered. Mirage is leaning hard right. Call it 12 miles per hour. Full value. Got it, Tommy said, scribbling with a grease pencil. Zone 2, valley center. The dust off the riverbed is drifting left. Call it 8 miles per hour, half value. Writing it down. Zone 3, target courtyard. Look at the smoke from their generator exhaust. Tommy adjusted his spotting scope. Smoke is rising, drifting slightly left. Updraft. Call it 5 miles per hour. Factor in a 22-inch rightward shift for Coriolis. And Tommy? Yeah? Calculate the spin drift. The bullet is spinning right. Over 8 seconds of flight, it's going to pull itself to the right by at least 40 inches. Tommy furiously ran the slide rule. Total windage hold. Abby, if my math is right, you need to hold 340 MOA high and roughly 4 full mils left. That means you aren't even aiming at the courtyard. You'll be aiming at the bare rock wall 100 yards above and to the left of the compound. I know, Abby said, her voice dropping into a zen-like calm. Suddenly, Tommy tensed. Movement. 2 black SUVs just rolled into the courtyard. Abby pressed her eye back into the optic. Through the glass, 2 miles away, she watched tiny figures emerge from the vehicles. Even at this extreme magnification, they looked like ants. But one ant was wearing a distinct heavy gray overcoat. I have positive ID, Tommy whispered, his voice trembling slightly with adrenaline. It's Dieter Voss. He's holding a metal briefcase. The buyers are stepping out of the bunker. This was it, the moment of truth. Range is 3,512, Tommy said, his voice falling into the rhythmic, robotic cadence of a spotter. Wind is currently gusting at our position. Wait for the lull. Abby wrapped her gloved finger around the curved trigger of the tack. 5-0. She exhaled slowly, watching her reticle hover over the jagged gray rock face high above the courtyard. She was aiming at nothing but stone. Wind is dropping, Tommy whispered. Send it when ready. Abby slowed her breathing. She felt the heavy thumping of her heart against the frozen earth. She timed the beats. Thump, thump, thump. She let out her final breath, pausing at the natural respiratory pause. The world went entirely silent. She began to apply 3 pounds of pressure to the trigger. The sear broke. It felt like snapping a glass rod inside a silent cathedral. The roar of the modified 416 Barrett was apocalyptic. A massive plume of concussive force kicked up the snow and dust around their hide, and the recoil punched backward with enough violence to bruise Abby's shoulder straight through her ballistic armor. The monolithic solid brass projectile, weighing 419 grains, was violently expelled from the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Shot away, Tommy murmured instinctively, locking his eye into the spotting scope, desperate to track the bullet's vapor trail. What happened next was a lesson in the brutal, unforgiving laws of physics. For the next 8.5 seconds, the bullet belonged entirely to the earth, the sky, and the chaotic math Abby had scribbled onto a piece of waterproof paper.
1 second.
The round crossed the first 300 meters, instantly slicing through the localized squall just outside their hide. It was supersonic, screaming through the freezing air. The right-to-left wind shear caught it immediately, pushing the heavy bullet aggressively off its center axis. To a layman, it would look like a catastrophic miss, veering wildly over the canyon gorge. 3 seconds. The bullet reached the dead center of the valley, 1.5 miles out. Here, the air density changed entirely. The freezing temperature of the peak surrendered to the warmer thermal columns rising off the Condil River thousands of feet below. The bullet hit the updraft. The aerodynamic jump forced the brass projectile upward, lifting it higher into the sky, aimed directly at the bare, jagged rock face towering above the target courtyard. It was dropping velocity fast. 5 seconds. Through the extreme magnification of the spotting scope, Tommy watched the target. Down in the courtyard, Dieter Voss was completely oblivious to the angel of death arcing through the stratosphere above him. But then, the twist happened, the nightmare scenario every sniper dreads. Voss didn't stand still. He laughed at something the buyer said, shifted his weight, and took 2 full steps to his left to hand over the metal briefcase containing the nuclear core. "He's moving! Target shifted left!" Tommy hissed, the panic finally breaking through his disciplined calm. A 2-step movement during an 8-second flight time was an insurmountable disaster. You can't steer a bullet in the air. 7 seconds. The 416 round crossed the transonic barrier. The crack of the sonic boom faded as the bullet slowed to subsonic speeds. This is where lesser bullets tumble, keyhole, and spiral out of control. But the custom lathe-turned brass held its gyroscopic stability. It was plunging downward now, gravity violently pulling it off the mountain wall and down toward the courtyard. Spindrift was dragging it to the right. The Coriolis effect had shifted it another 2 feet horizontally. 8.4 seconds. Down in the compound, Dieter Voss handed the silver case to the buyer. As he did, the buyer instinctively pulled the case toward his own chest. Voss let go, his hand dropping to his side. Because he had taken 2 steps to his left, he was now standing exactly 28 feet left of where he had originally been spotted, which was exactly where Abigail Weston had actually aimed. She hadn't aimed at where Voss was standing. While studying the mirage, she had watched his body language. She noticed the way he favored his right leg, the way he oriented his shoulders toward the buyers but kept his feet angled toward his SUV. She knew that when the transaction happened, he would step into the exchange to hand over the heavy case. She had calculated his biomechanics right alongside the barometric pressure. The bullet struck Dieter Voss just below the collarbone, tearing through his chest cavity with devastating subsonic kinetic transfer. Through the scope, the visual was absolute. Voss didn't stumble. He didn't cry out. The kinetic energy lifted him completely off his feet, throwing him backward into the reinforced steel door of his own armored SUV. He collapsed into the mud, dead before his brain could even register the sound of the impact. "Impact," Tommy whispered, his voice trembling in sheer disbelief. "Direct hit. Center mass. Target is down." Down in the courtyard, absolute chaos erupted. Because the bullet had been fired from over 2 miles away and was traveling at subsonic speeds upon impact, there was no gunshot crack. There was no muzzle flash. To the heavily armed mercenaries standing in the courtyard, their boss had simply exploded in front of them. Paranoia did the rest. Voss's guards immediately assumed the buyers had used a silenced weapon or a hidden assassin to double-cross them. The buyers, seeing Voss violently eliminated, assumed it was an ambush. Before the metallic echo of the distant gunshot could even reach the valley floor, the courtyard turned into a vicious, enclosed firefight. AK-47 fire and flashbangs lit up the compound. The buyer holding the nuclear core dropped the case in terror and was immediately cut down by Voss's frantic security detail. "They're shooting each other," Tommy said, his eye glued to the scope, watching the bloodbath unfold. "The core is on the ground. Nobody is picking it up. They're locked in a firefight." "Then our job here is done," Abby said. Her voice was flat, devoid of adrenaline or triumph. She mechanically racked the massive bolt of the TAC 50, extracting the single smoking brass casing. She caught it in her gloved hand and slipped it into her pocket. "Pack it up, Tommy. We have a mountain to climb down." By the time JSOC's rapid response drone repositioned over the Condil Valley, the courtyard was a graveyard. The drone's thermal cameras broadcast the feed directly back to the bunker in Erbil. General Arthur Clayton stood frozen in front of the massive digital wall. The blinking red dot that represented Dieter Voss was gone. The thermal signatures of a dozen mercenaries were slowly cooling in the mountain mud. And right in the center of the carnage, glowing with a faint, steady heat signature against the cold earth, was the metal briefcase, untouched. S-400 batteries are still quiet, CIA Station Chief Harper said, his voice hushed with awe. The enemy doesn't even know we were there. The local authorities are moving in to secure the courtyard now. We've coordinated a Kurdish Peshmerga team to recover the core. It's over. Clayton didn't say a word. He just stared at the screen, doing the mental math. 3,512 meters. 8 seconds of flight time. Hand-calculated ballistics. No digital computer. A moving target. She did it, Harper whispered. She actually did it. Get them a stealth extraction, Clayton ordered gruffly, though the rigid posture of his shoulders had finally collapsed in relief. Send the quietest bird we have to the secondary rally point. I want them home. The extraction was arguably more dangerous than the shot itself. Abby and Tommy spent the next 10 hours descending the treacherous, icy cliffs under the cover of darkness. Every muscle in Abby's body screamed in protest, her joints aching from the freezing cold and the crushing weight of the sniper system strapped to her back. When the modified MH-60 Blackhawk finally swooped low over a barren ridgeline to pull them out, Tommy practically collapsed onto the floor of the cabin. Abby simply sat on the jump seat, staring out the open door at the rising sun painting the jagged mountains in hues of blood orange and gold. She looked completely ordinary, just a quiet woman from Nebraska, with dirt on her face and tired eyes. 24 hours later, Abby Weston walked into the JSOC command bunker in Erbil. She was dressed in clean tactical pants and a black fleece pullover, her hair pulled back into a tight, messy bun. The room was nearly empty, save for General Clayton, who was standing by the coffee pot. When he saw her enter, he stopped. He set his mug down on the counter and turned to face her. For a long moment, the 4-star general and the chief petty officer just looked at each other. The silence was thick, but it was no longer heavy with judgment. It was heavy with respect. Chief Weston, Clayton said, his voice surprisingly soft. General, Abby replied, standing at parade rest. Clayton walked over to the briefing table. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object, setting it gently onto the laminate surface. It was a single-fired 416 brass casing. The recovery team had found it on Peak 82 during a secondary sweep. The official report will state that Dieter Voss was killed in a syndicate dispute, Clayton said, his eyes never leaving hers. It will state that the nuclear core was recovered by Allied Kurdish forces after a violent internal firefight between smugglers. JSOC was never in the Condil Mountains. SEAL Team 6 was never deployed. Understood, sir, Abby said smoothly. She knew how black operations worked. The greatest achievements of her career would never exist on paper. The Canadian record of 3,540 meters was set with a digital ballistic computer on a stationary target in optimal desert conditions, Clayton continued, his voice tightening with a fierce, subdued emotion. What you did on that mountain, calculating a 3-zone wind shear by hand, accounting for a target shift during an 8-second flight time over 2 miles. There is no sniper in the history of the United States military who could have made that shot. Abby remained perfectly still. Tommy is a good spotter, sir. He read the wind zones perfectly. Clayton smiled a rare, genuine expression that cracked his weathered face. You're deflecting, Chief. I told you it was impossible. I told you it was mathematical suicide. I was wrong. And I owe you a profound apology. Abby looked at the brass casing on the table, then back at the general. The edges of her mouth twitched upward into a faint, exhausted smile. No apology necessary, General, Abby said softly. The math doesn't care who's right or wrong. It just is. Clayton picked up the brass casing and held it out to her. Take it. Keep it somewhere safe. Someday, when this war is over and the files are declassified, the world is going to want to know the name of the ghost who pulled this off. Abby reached out and took the cold brass in her palm. It felt light now. All the immense pressure, the terrifying weight of the world that had rested on this tiny piece of metal, was gone. With all due respect, sir, Abby said, turning toward the door, I'm just a farm girl who hates missing. She walked out of the bunker, disappearing back into the shadows of the covert world, leaving behind a legend that the military elite would whisper about for decades. The sniper who beat the wind. The mathematician who conquered the mountain. The simple woman who proved that for those who know how to listen to the world, nothing is too far. Did Abby's impossible 3,500-meter shot leave you breathless? Real-world tactical mastery and heart-pounding suspense like this deserve to be shared. If you loved this deep dive into extreme ballistics and the unbreakable spirit of a female warrior, hit that like button right now. Share this story with friends who crave intense, realistic military thrillers, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more epic, untold stories of courage from the shadows. Drop a comment below. What was the most intense moment for you?